Okay, so this is our second session on eco-spiritualism. And if you haven't watched our first session, please go back and watch. It was called Paradise and Lady Gaia. And some of the topics that we opened up, the responses that I got on YouTube were that they're really enjoying this kind of like opening topics that have never been spoken about before. And I like to say that I am the fool and that my energy is like theatrical and I need to just kind of flip the script on everything because Uranus is in my first house. So don't believe what I'm saying. The reason that we're having this conversation is to just get stuff out and start to open the throat chakra, open the third eye, open the crown chakra, and also ground deeply down into earth. The conversation is going to be authentic. It doesn't have to be positive. We don't need research to prove, okay, because we're working from this kind of magi realm of intuition and listening to Gaia and then adding our own experience. And so that's what's going on in these conversations. I want to pull forth that we had some very interesting comments, both private and public, on YouTube. One of them was about menstruation, and that one of the most often performed surgeries in the United States is the hysterectomy. So everyone who's listening to this can go back to that first conversation because we're talking about whether menstruation is truly natural to woman's body. And does she need to ovulate every month? And one person said, well, what about the way it goes in men's bodies? Because in men's bodies, they are aroused and create sperm during arousal. So there's a lot of interesting things about, do we even need to have this ovulation happening every month and the menstruation, which, charges us psychically and also creates a lot of emotion. But that is part of the environmental eco-spiritual discussion that we're having, because one of our members talked about how when we have a lot of toxins in the environment, the way that woman moves that out is often through her menstruation. So that if you've got pesticides and aluminum in the air and CE something or another that was sprayed on all the frying pans that DuPont did, and it's in all the water systems now, one of the ways that woman purifies herself right now is through menstruation. So in our conversation about eco-spiritualism today, we're doing this because Ceres, the goddess of fertility, abundance, and agriculture, is in Sagittarius for the highest truth. She's retrograding, and I did a solar return for July. She's going all the way back to the beginning of Sagittarius. So she's going to review everything in all of the degrees of Sagittarius for getting the conversation going. So now I'm going to open up what I like to do, which is like the big can of worms, all right? And then we can go anywhere with this. It doesn't even have to be what I'm saying. But I just had a session with a woman who says she has memories of being buried alive in the earth. She has memories of being burned. She has memories of being drowned. And she has memories of being hung, like swinging in the air. Those are all the elements of earth. And I never thought about this before, but when I started to talk to her, like my hair started to raise up. That there's a settling that we all need to have with the traumas that we've had during this Iron Age. Would you feel comfortable being buried into the earth right now? Would it be okay for you to have soil all over your body? And if not, are you holding a trauma? And this is the time to bring it up because Saturn and Pluto are in an applying conjunction this year. How do you feel about being out there deep in the water in the ocean? My mother has a terrible terror of water, and it's because she's had drownings, okay? How do you feel about sitting in a fire circle and really having ceremony around the element of fire? Not so great if you've been burned. And how do you feel about the wind in the trees and getting up in the tree if you've been hung before? So this is this is a really heavy, but Saturn is stationing right now, way to open this conversation. But when I was talking with my friend Sandra this week, she's doing a lot of soul retrieval of these timelines that disconnect us from Earth. Like, are you afraid to go way out into the water and like be in the lake? How does that feel? Maybe you have a hidden trauma there. And I think that some of these things were accidental, that we died by different ways. We died by fire, we died by drowning, but some of them I think were purposeful. And I think particularly with the session that I just did, she was clearly a priestess, you know, Vesta conjunct the ascendant in Taurus, the sensual body, you know, enormous amounts of mystery within her body. But she has also the womb terror from really getting into her body, of being sensual in her body, of experiencing Earth sensually. And I wonder if the reasons that we can pollute the water, you know, with our nicotine patches and sunscreen that has a lot of bizarre chemicals, is because we've lost a respect in a way if we've been drowned or purposely injured during other lifetimes. So start to look into these traumas of what is preventing us from having real sacred experience in nature. Are you afraid to go running in the woods because you've been hunted before? That's one of mine. So I have to like get okay with the traumas that are deep inside me in order for me to go out in the woods by myself and really love nature again. So probably the group was not expecting this introduction. This is kind of heavy, but let's see where we go with it. And you don't have to go on this thread. So anyone who's listening to this conversation can also comment in YouTube, but let's see where the group wants to go with this.
I'll just share that Grant and I have been practicing doing mantras for each of the elements: earth, air, sky, water, and cosmos, or fire. What did I forget? Anyway, so we've been very into charging the elements and trying to retrieve or remember how we can also command the elements. So it's interesting. A part of the process that you're talking about is making peace with each of the elements. I can't off the bat think of a trauma related to specifically an element, except like being burned. That I have a very visceral experience about that, and a lot of throat chakra issues that I've had to heal. Fear of public speaking, fear of something going wrong if I speak my truth in public. And I sing, and I've had to just keep pressing into my fears and proving myself wrong, that I can speak in public, I can sing in public without something terrible happening to me. So I've had to keep pushing myself to kind of weed that out or transmute it. But unlike opposite of you, when I was younger, and still to this day, I will run in the woods to feel safe. And my sister would be like, Jessica, you can't do that. That's not safe. You know, someone could rape you or kill you. And it never even dawned on me that I wouldn't be safe in the woods. That was my safe place that I would go to in the dark at night. That's where I felt at home. So a lot of Artemis going on, I guess.
Yeah. So this is really, like, the group did not know I was going to say this. So this is really interesting. And what Jessica is bringing in is that making peace with the elements by honoring them, acknowledging that the elements are here with us. And I often, when I teach like a yoga hike out in the woods, and I'm teaching for the Woodstock Inn, people will say to me, "What's out here? What's out here? What animals are out here?" Like, straight off, they don't feel safe in the woods. So what you're bringing in, Jessica, is that we really can feel safe in the woods, and we can feel safe in the woods at night. And my experience, and I'm in Vermont, so you would think like it's pretty safe in the woods, but there's a deep terror in every single yoga hike I do within guests. What's out here? Do you know your way around? And then I tell them that I live in the woods. Like, I live in like solid woods here. There's nobody but me and the woods. But from my childhood, I did have that. So I was hunted. Yeah, I was run after. And I had that reoccurring dream again and again that something was hunting me in the woods. So that was one of my traumas. And so when we're reintroducing eco-spiritualism, like really loving the earth and finding Gaia sacred, is if you do have those fears, and like, go spend a night alone in the woods, which I have done too, purposely, like vision questing for 2 nights alone in the woods with nothing, with nobody, like no communication, no way to reach out, way up on mountaintops, and get to know the woods as this place of Gaia that holds you and loves you. But I would say, in my experience with yoga hikes here in Vermont, most people are really scared. They're nervous, and they want to know that I have my cell phone and that I can find my way back. So that's a piece of how do we get back out there into nature, into the woods, into that barefoot, free being that humans are meant to be in our sensual bodies. So now, what else do people want to say here?
I think talking about the wood piece, to sort of expand the scope slightly, it sounds like it's a fear of the wild in these guests, and it's the fear of the unknown, the fear of the untamed. And I know that's a big part of some of the men's work that is popular to talk about, that wild man or that untamed passion or zest. Certainly seems to be something that we've lost respect for, or we don't cultivate. You know, we certainly don't get those messages from media around cultivating that in ourselves. It's a lot of civilization, getting along in a city, or giving away authority. So fascinating to hear a yoga hike. Sounds fun. I would love that. That to also mention on with the elements, in charging the elements with the malas daily too, I almost start to feel the element in my body a little bit. Mm-hmm. So like our fire, earth are kind of the main ones we've worked on so far. And so I'll cultivate that. I am made up of this. Let me feel that in me. Let me love that around and in. Mm-hmm. And it's very powerful. It's like it vibrates. Mm-hmm. It's been a great practice.
Yeah, so it's very much about embodiment. It sounds like that we are physical beings of earth, air, fire, water, and ether also. And how is it that we can experience that I am the fire, I am the water. The water is also alive, and we all know that in this group. But getting that experience by having this discussion, it might seem like, why are we even having this discussion? It's so obvious. I mean, some people had some interesting comments when I chose to put a thing about ticks, and that ticks were likely created at Plum Island and were then released accidentally from Plum Island, so that a huge outspread of this disease-carrying organism is here in the Northeast. I don't know if it's everywhere, but such that there's a lot of people here in the Northeast who will not go outside, will absolutely not touch the grass. And I live in Vermont, where, you know, if a child is coming over to your house, the first thing the mother says is, what is your tick protection? What will you put on the kids? Like, that happens before even, are the kids going to have lunch there? What tick protection will you put on the kids? That's how it's almost like an extreme fear here in the Northeast. And so many people have had Lyme disease that it really, people are terrified to go outside in the woods. So what we want to get into is the fears and traumas over being those wild, sensual, earthly beings who are created of the elements. What I want to say to the public right now, not just the group, is that what my understanding of the spirochete is, which is a parasitic creature that comes from the tick, is that it really needs like a vibration and a chemical cocktail in your body to really produce that spirochete enzyme that eats away your stomach and your nervous system. So if the chemical cocktail is there, then the Lyme disease becomes worse. Whereas when Claude and I are bit by a tick, like Claude has a huge tick bite on him right now, right here. But we don't have the other chemical cocktails. So we eat organically, we drink purified water from a well, all of those, like the fluoride is not there, the chlorine is not there, the whatever the word is for the Agent Orange stuff that Monsanto developed, all of that is not in our chemical cocktail, so that the tick doesn't have a root in our system, because it's a parasite that needs already to have your autoimmune body like not responding. But my thyroid is so strong, which Jessica was also talking about, like once your thyroid's strong, once your throat chakra can communicate, once you can speak authentically, my thyroid, I haven't been sick since 2013 with anything. So it very much has to do with the whole of us. Can we speak our truth? Can we communicate? Can we strengthen that thyroid? So this is a lot to talk about in terms of, there are things that have been done to humans truly and have been created in our environment to create these chemical cocktails, to keep us unwell, to keep us afraid of, the moose in the forest or the coyotes in the forest, which, yeah, they're out there, definitely. And they're huge, definitely. But they are our ancestors. They are the creatures that we have developed here with. As humans, we have less and less interaction with things like a horse, which to me is a common everyday absolute. That's a big animal. I'm right there with them. So more and more want to cultivate why we've become afraid, what are the deep terrors underneath, and how to get back out there and rewild ourselves and realize that we are these elements. What else do people want to say at this point?
Well, I think that what brought it up in me when you were talking about this was a feeling of, when you have perhaps had a traumatic passing or experience with one of the elements, that it can really kind of affect you on a genetic or a DNA level. And then that kind of gets carried forth, not only kind of like energetically, but in the population over time. So whether to the degree that that's intentional, we could speculate, but certainly just like, tales of history, whether they are true or not, there is plenty of trauma that is going to put kind of barriers of fear in individuals and collectively, energetically, about different elements. Like for me, when I remember being very small, being my parents had a wood stove and being extremely terrified that the house was going to catch on fire, and it was triggered just watching the fire in the stove one night, and it flared up, and then all of a sudden I remember experiencing being in a house on fire, and when you have that kind of fear in you, it creates that boundary. Like a lot of our discussion is with Saturn stationing is boundaries, and are they appropriate boundaries or inappropriate boundaries? And I think this look into the our relationship with the very elemental constituents of our earthly physical experiences. Where do we have those trauma boundaries that we need to break down, but where also do we need to develop healthy boundaries? It is rightful to be afraid of the ocean. It is very deeply powerful, but not to the extent that you limit yourself from having an amazing romantic voyage on the ocean. Those are very joyful experiences. And part of living on Earth is that it's wild and stuff happens, and learning how to transmute that in you, whether it is a genetic thing, from your ancestors. One of my ancestors was a Salem witch, so there is definitely that fear of hanging in me in persecution. So where I don't like people's hands around my neck, it just does not feel good. But where do we heal that so that we can move on and flow into our next experience with grace and understand it as an experience, and then have that kind of deeper relationship with that kind of element, and then also with ourselves and the environment. The other thing that it kind of brought up when me was thinking about and this is speculative, not everyone believe this, but with elemental beings, or the energies of the plant world, the earth, fairies, a lot of us can feel that there's a consciousness there, and this fear perhaps separates us from that. I don't think that everyone needs to believe in these kind of elemental beings, but I certainly have had experiences in nature with kind of other alternative consciousnesses, with plants, with the wild, with the rivers, and being in that fearful place does create some separation there. And I think we have talked a little bit about the separation with the elemental world. And this, we often talk about Ceres retrograde being that planet really representing nurturing, but part of that mythology is how Persephone is taken to the underworld, and a big part of it is that grief and loss that Ceres feels, because all of a sudden she feels alone, and she feels that this creative, her daughter, her creation that she has invested in tremendously, has been taken from her. And we are working through how we kind of are feeling where something that we are investing in is sometimes taken from us in some ways. Certainly my experience, I went to the beach, the ocean today, and it's been stormy here in the Northeast. The waves were huge. It was high tide, and it was throwing up all kinds of seaweed, but you couldn't walk a foot without there being plastic in the seaweed bottle caps, all kinds of things. And so we are kind of being asked, I think, to really think about what we're investing in, and what it would feel like to really lose something like that. And even, as she got her daughter back, though it was like half the time her daughter would go back down to Hades and then come back to see her mother. And so this is like, where are we putting our energy in? But how does it feel like to really lose that? And when we get it back, what's that new experience look like? And in some ways, if you have that trauma with the different elements, it's being with that element, getting some kind of trauma with that element and then healing it. And then how do you move forward? So those are the things that came up for me.
Yeah. So the Ceres retrograde mythology is really important, Holly. I hadn't thought of it like that, but let's get into that a little bit, because when Persephone chooses, in my telling of the story, Persephone chooses to be abducted. Okay, so she wants to know the dark. She wants to know the underworld. And in my telling of the story, her mother's always saying, don't know the underworld. Don't look into the deep, dark forest, because the dark things live out there. And Persephone keeps going, what? What's out there? Oh, maybe I should find out what's out there in the dark. There's something scary. And so she's out in the meadow one day playing with her fairies and her nymphs and all her elemental beings, and the flowers and the plants are speaking to her. And she's playing with the other nymph beings, and suddenly this big dark man comes out of the deep dark woods, and he starts coming at her, and he's got these big black horses with fire coming through the nose. And she goes, that must be the dark that my mother warned me about. And her heart's beating, and she goes, I think I want to know the dark. And Pluto comes down and he grabs her, and she lets herself be put into the horse-drawn cart, and he goes off with her down into the underworld. Okay. And now, again, don't believe me. You can tell the story how it works for you. But in the underworld, that's the whole Persephone story. But what's going on with Demeter, or Ceres, who is Demeter, is Ceres can't find her beloved. She's been taken by the dark, which she warned her about. Please don't go into the forest, into the dark. Please don't. And then Demeter starts to be sick. She can't eat. She can't create the fertility. She doesn't bring the springtime. The world starts to go cold, and the abundance fails, the harvest fails, the crops fails, the humans are starving. And the gods say, Demeter, please, what are you doing? Oh my gosh, the humans are starving. Earth is going to die. Please do something. And Demeter says, I can't be without my beloved daughter. You're going to have to get her from the underworld. And the gods say, oh gosh, how are we going to bargain with Pluto? But you can't bargain with the god of the underworld. He's ruthless. And again, Pluto just stationed and is applying with Saturn. So this is all in there, okay? So they send somebody down, and if somebody knows the exact name of who they sent down, tell me. But they sent somebody down, and they made a deal and said, look, you gotta let her come up. The humans are dying. Demeter will not create abundance. The planet is dying. Please do something. We've got to do something. And Pluto is given some exchange, which I can't remember exactly what it is, but there's an exchange made, and Pluto says, okay, she can go back up for 6 months of the year, and then she will have to come back down. So in a way, we're in a very interesting cycle right now where I feel like the goddess is coming back up. Okay. Demeter, Ceres, is having this huge review with Jupiter, of the god of justice, who with Saturn and Pluto create this trinity. Okay, so it's very interesting if you all want to get into and talk about the mythology of that. But the goddess has to do this huge review right now of what would it really be like to have lost the species of Earth. What would it be like for the ocean to be completely acidic and the creatures dying? Like last year when I was on that ocean, Holly, my group, I've told you, Claude and I walked October 1st through like October 10th, the beaches of the Maine and New Hampshire coastline, and there were dead seal after dead seal after dead seal after dead seal. We had never seen anything like this before. And the red tide was coming up. It was like red blood was coming up in the ocean. And it was just when Venus was gone retrograde into the underworld. And I'm like, oh, this is so weird. It's like, you know, Persephone was conjunct Venus, went into the underworld at that time. And we asked someone, what's wrong with all these seals? Because there were also squirrels. There were thousands of dead squirrels, hundreds of thousands of dead squirrels on the beach and on the roads. And we were told that they had a virus, distemper. Like the seals and the squirrels and even other rodents were all dead on the beach. And we were like, this is so gross. Oh, and they would pick them up and take them away, and there would be more the next day. Claude and I had never seen anything like this. But just tying this in, like we saw that when Venus went retrograde with asteroid Persephone last October. Now we have Ceres doing this huge review, and I see more and more people posting about, you know, let's talk about what's going on the planet in terms of pollution and environment. But the way I'm reeling this back is, if we have still struggle with the earth, the water, the fire, the air, then we don't care if we pollute it, because people are so traumatized deep inside that they don't love their own bodies enough to love Gaia. So that's part of what I'm getting into here, is that wherever your trauma is in you, like my mother does not do water. It's not that she's out polluting water, but it's also that there's not like this interaction and respect. We're losing that wildness that Grant was also talking about, where we just don't feel safe anywhere in the natural environments. So let's hear from that perspective.
Yeah, or in separate, like when you are more in tune with the elements, I feel like you may feel more a part of the earth rather than a consciousness living on the earth. And those are two different perspectives. And when you are that, when you feel that you are part of the earth, and like a lot of the shamanic teachings that I've worked with is, you know, you are a part of this system here. You are not here to like conquer or dominate the planet. You are here to be, you know, shamanically, we are here to be living amongst the planet and walk like to walk lightly and beautifully and almost sexily upon the earth with gentleness, and love her as the mother, and to be gentle with her. And but if you do not have that feeling of being a part of her ecosystem and feeling separate, then it's very easy to slip in that I'm separate and I'm here and then I can conquer and dominate. And when you start going in that direction, it becomes more and more okay to pollute, to take resources and use them in an unsustainable way, to just kind of, you know, put up roads and buildings and cities and not really think about that, hey, perhaps a rare endemic species lives here. And if you pave over this swamp, you now destroy an entire population of, you know, butterflies, you know, and it has happened. So you know, I think we've been talking about choice points, and we are at one of these choice points of, are we part of the Earth system, or are we, you know, identifying ourselves as very separate from it and trying to, you know, dominate it? And I mean, our group, I think, feels much more, you know, a part of the Earth. But this is one of these things that we are, I think, being asked to become an awareness of, is how separate do we feel? And And how separate are we really? Just let you think about that or feel into that.
Grant and Jessica, what do you want to say about that? I want to hear some more from you.
I think what's coming up for me is some of what Corey Good has talked about, that we actually do have the technologies to clean up the earth in about 4 years. And that what we're looking at is fighting against these systems, or this war machine that wants to take organic matter and turn it into garbage. And seeing it too as like, this is a system with its own kind of intelligence and its own kind of infection. That really is like this machine that's just going to grind things up and throw them away. And Corey Good has said what we need to ask for those technologies to be released to the population, because the people who are creating and inventing these things, it's like there's a block on them from the powers that be to distribute them. And I think psychologically, to become aware of, for me in my own healing, to understand that it's not natural for me to, and I don't know, I go back and forth about this because the goddess has her destructive aspects too. And this is the age of the Kali Yuga, where the goddess is kind of, we're grinding things down. But to come to a place where I'm not unconsciously trying to hurt myself because I have unconscious, unprocessed pain, but rediscovering the preciousness and the nurturing mother that really does love her creation. And it's almost like, I was thinking this today when I was in the hot tub and I was just getting into this open space, that it seems like Ereshkigal is kind of the queen on top who's running the destructive, destroying everything. And then we're kind of waiting for that resurrection of Inanna, or the queen of heaven, or the queen of earth, that is the good, heart-centered mother that wants to protect and love her creation and not destroy it. So becoming conscious of those different aspects at play. And thinking about vibration, I think too, and like if there is a war machine that has an agenda to turn organic matter into garbage, if there is an agenda to infect the earth and to just make things sick, then how do we establish sovereignty and say, I'm going to choose? People would love it if I would just live in fear and anxiety all the time. What if I walked through this day in peace? What if I cultivated joy? And really taking responsibility for recognizing the kind of Fox News fear program, keep everybody in this agitated state, where I think humans are this place where they don't recognize that agitated state might feel like a life force because it's a kind of energy, but it's that cortisol energy, it's stress, it's that feeding of the life force instead of that open, joyful, abundant energy that can come when the heart chakra is open. So I do think part of the work is to unlock the codes to the heart chakra and to bring in the wisdom of the heart, the beings that guard the heart chakra, anchor that back onto the planet. And be mindful about what vibrations we are intentionally choosing to live with. Because like you said, if we're not in alignment with the vibrations of fear, if we're being very clear about what we're inviting into our life, if we're eradicating those kinds of almost theological or spiritual codes of, I just need to suffer the whole time I'm here. I'm just going to be punished the whole time I'm here. I mean, that comes from a deep place of not respecting the soul, or not respecting the body, of wanting to like unconsciously punish ourselves here. So I think it is this deep work that we're all doing to peel back those layers and say, this is a gift of grace, and we do have a choice about how to conduct our lives and what frequencies we want to invite into our lives and where we want to make those sacred boundaries. So that's what's coming up for me.
Grant, you want to say anything? And then I'll, yeah.
Yeah, I certainly, it's been a practice to recognize that cortisol panic energy as it comes up. And I think, you know, going off of watching TV for years as well, you know, you try to tune back in to watch what everyone's watching, or, you know, I don't know what percentage of people watch the TV that's put on these days, but it's unwatchable. It's intense. It is assaulting now. And it's very obvious to see. I think we were talking with our friend who brought up this concept of indoctrination, or this concept of just, you know, here's the way you need to think. And this is what everyone's thinking. We are the authority in what to think. And it's not honoring the human spirit in that way. And it's not honoring life, really. It's trying to induce panic and consumption. You know, I think consumption is one of the great things we don't talk about from an eco-spirituality perspective as well. There is a sacred level of consumption. And all of the programming, all of the media, there's such pressure to overconsume. And our level of consumption of the Earth's resources right now is unsustainable. And that's hard news for a lot of people to hear. And they will deny it. But there's a reset, a reckoning that needs to be handled. And I would prefer we do that in a sacred, honoring, intentional way than as a surprise later.
Yeah. I love it how everybody brings in a different piece and a flavor and like a feeling to everyone's comment. So Jessica was pointing out that we have had for many years, and I'm getting emails from the time of the sixth sun about the ancient technologies that we've had, including the Baghdad battery that was dating over 2,000 years ago. Corey Good has talked about many of the technologies that we already have now, electromagnetic fields of crystals that use silicone as an energy source, technology that generates pure, clean water from the atmosphere. So there are many different technologies that are available. And I think that's what I was speaking about last time with the Atlantean timelines. We're capable of enormous amounts of energy from crystals and other sources. What I'm also hearing from Grant is that we have this choice point right now to consume TV and continue to consume fear of the Kali Yuga, kind of the, you know, Persephone's experience of the darkness. She wanted to know Pluto. She wanted to know the underworld. That's part of the goddess's great power, is that she's been willing to completely descend and know all of the creepy, horrible things, including the war machine. And we are at this choice point. We truly are. And I think that having these kind of conversations put it out there in the field stronger than if we just know it alone in our own house. So having this conversation creates an incredible field that people start to experience just by us having this vibratory conversation. Now, in terms of consuming, we are part of that war machine as much as we allow ourselves to be indoctrinated into the buying of the cheap plastic stuff. And it's so tricky because it's on, every TV, every radio, it's in the social media news feed of buy this fabulous dress. And as Venus ruling my ascendant, I would love every fabulous dress. I mean, I personally also think I would look good in every fabulous dress. So not to be like, denying myself, but also like just having that sacred experience of, I don't need every fabulous rayon dress that is available, because I so love Gaia, that I would rather be naked and levitating for my own personal technology of, I'm going to teleport to Minnesota rather than get on a plane, because we truly do have those technologies inside of us. I have levitated, not that I've made that incredibly public, but we have these technologies also of popping into our star Merkaba, of telepathy, of time travel, of teleportation. They are our technologies. They are in our bodies. We have them, even if we also have crystal technologies, which we do. So part of loving this body and loving Gaia and making that choice point of holding Gaia sacred is, I'm going to be able to get those incredible technologies back again, because my vibration is going to raise to the point where I don't need a big crystal in my yard to generate, because I am crystal. I am silicon-based electromagnetic being, which we all are in our 12-strand DNA. How we get there is to not be fooled by all the other mechanisms of the war machine. And this is the whole of it, is like, even with Corey, and I listened to Corey way back when he was with, before Gaia, okay? He was being interviewed by some folks from England, whose names I can't remember. But this was when Corey still had a lot of entities and a lot of interference in him, and he was honest about it. But we actually have all the technology within us that we are asking to be disclosed right now. And that's part of my organic experience of, let's have teleportation. That it already exists. Jump rooms to Mars already exist. But we also have that within us when we really connect with Gaia, because Gaia is our like home 12-strand divine DNA center. She is it. And when we connect with her, that's when you start to first experience, oh, I can levitate. Wow. And if you've done yoga, which some people in this group have, it's all a matter of balance, intention, and timing. And you have incredible technologies. If you think you can do a headstand, girlfriend, let me tell you, there's incredible technologies in us. And it's when we really tap into that connection with spirit in Gaia. We already were levitating, teleporting, fully telepathic. We've had all those technologies. So we're in this interesting space of, am I going to demand it from the government? Because I did have one person saying, oh, we just need money from Nessera and Gessera, or whatever it is. Folks, I got to tell you, money is not going to help anyone. Okay, so stop waiting for the government to give you some like $100,000 in your bank account. Okay, that is not where it is, because then everyone's just going to buy cheap stuff at the store again. We have to get into this heart space that Jessica was talking about and really reconnect with the truth of who we are as souls. And our experience here on Gaia is potentially incredible. So let's see what people want to say now.
Well, I think the the part about you know getting $100,000 from the government, we have to accept that's not going to happen. And I think that's one of those Saturn and Capricorn structures that Pluto is rapidly, or maybe it doesn't seem rapidly because of all the structures seem to be intact. But I'm starting to see it to really crumble, and I am knowing more and more people who are dissatisfied with their working situations and feeling that they are a slave to the paycheck, and um, you know sometimes feeling like emotionally guilt tripped into working extra hours and not really having any time for themselves, so they don't feel grounded, they don't feel connected to anyone because they go to work, sit behind the desks, type on a computer, work 8, 10, maybe 12 hours a day, go home, eat something, get up the next day, do it over again. And maybe they do it 5 days a week, maybe they do it 6 days a week. For this thing called a dollar, and a number in a bank account, which essentially is appearing to me to be more and more of a made up system, an artificial system of commerce. When many of us have forgotten, but there was a time when everything was bartered. Oh, I need a service from you. I'm going to give you 3 pumpkins because I have 3 pumpkins and you need food. So I need you to come and help me out. And we traded and we act as a tribe and a community. And I see 2 things. One, we are heavily, invested at the moment of trying to keep this economic system going, but feeling dissatisfied. And at the same time, a lot of people feel like they don't have community anymore. They don't know their neighbors and also don't feel as connected to the earth. So I just see this kind of coalescing of a shift in that way of, how are we spending our time? Also, Saturn. How are we, Saturn is, how are we investing our time in structures? Is it really where we want to be? And then the other thing, and I work in the healthcare industry right now. One, I saw both a huge amount of mental health patients come through in the last 2 weeks where people have felt very unbalanced. They have felt either extremely depressed or bipolar, and not understanding what's going on. Like, this has been a really low period for people who are not like astrologically in the know, and they're coming in looking for their chemical cures. I need some Prozac. I need some anti-anxiety medication. I'm having panic attacks. My heart's racing and I don't know why. And but I'm having trouble at my job and I'm, can you give me something to fix this? I need a chemical. I need a drug. And I know that I've had days when I've had that like cortisol rush that Grant was talking about. And the big thing that made me was I went out back and I walked out in the woods and I sat by my marsh pond and I watched the ducks. And I felt part of nature again, and it was wonderful. In this, you know, the chemicals, we've talked a bit about the ticks, we've talked about the STDs online a bit, in the fear of physically contacting another being because I might catch something that's going to make me gravely ill. And then we have come to accept so much chemicals in our water and in our food and in just as a way to bring some kind of mental balance that is just what you do. Oh, I can't focus at my job because I haven't been grounded in nature. But now I have a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder and I'm on Adderall. Like, we have got to really think about the root causes of some things on a societal level and like how we are treating it, and is it really appropriate? And this is a use. Chemical resources are powerful, but this is, are we using our resources in an appropriate way? So those were things that came up for me just now.
Yeah, I think Grant said something about that in the group this week about, Grant, you can jump in here when you're ready, but something about like when you use the mind altering chemicals, so that you're not stressed out at work or you're not anxious or whatever it is, then you also like disconnect from other people, but also from nature. What did you say something about that this week, Grant?
Yeah, that was one of the research ones. Tylenol, actually, I think, by the Bayer Group, right? And everybody, it's safe, right? And the concept of clinically safe is certainly different from the concept of emotionally safe, energetically safe. So this research, and there's 2 studies now that is showing that as you're deadening the physical pain of sore muscles or whatever your physical pain is, it's also deadening your emotional connection, and you have less empathy. And specifically, it was looking at positive empathy. So where you have good feelings when other people succeed. And I mean, it was a clinical research trial where they're showing people respond less positively in reading these stories after they took a dosage of Tylenol. So it's shutting down that mental center of feeling grateful, feeling joy, feeling compassion and excitement for others' success.
And what was the Bayer company linked to?
I was trying to recall that. I didn't do the full research to look into the history of that, but I think it started in Germany. So it's fascinating that this is something that's in every grocery store, every drugstore. And Tylenol is such a
that's what we give to our kids when they have a fever.
Yep. And there's certainly people who go on it as a maintenance medication as well, and they're constantly taking Tylenol. They're having a daily dose, and the emotional deadening that would cause. I mean, when we think about people who have tough jobs or people who are having to, like deny medical claims or something, how do you live with that job? How is that reckoned with in your heart? And this is one of the ways I could see people doing it is, man, you have to turn that off. You have to find some way of not feeling while you perform some of those things, because it's a very challenging place.
Well, and the modern health industry, certainly where we are, they don't prescribe go walk on the grass for 15 minutes and watch the ducks and see if you feel better.
They should.
And there's a really big medical establishment here that keeps building and expanding, and they had a yoga studio at one point that I worked at, but they couldn't afford to keep the yoga studio running, but they can afford to do lots of other building projects. I mean, you can just see like there's such a rub, and I think too it's that reckoning between I'm not a scientist and I want to respect people who are smart and have those skills in that way, because there is something between that is important for us to know that biology, but then I feel like the intuitive realms of doing Reiki or Tai Chi, all these much gentler ways of responding to illnesses, I wish that was more commonly used in the hospital setting and it wasn't seen as bogus and you're just weird. Those kinds of health practices aren't turned to first. It's like, well, let's get the big lasers or the big chemicals or the antibiotics. And I know that's changing a little bit. Like in New York, I think at Johns Hopkins, they're using Reiki more regularly. And so maybe it's just taking some time to bring it to the Midwest here. But I would love to see more of that balancing between, good science, but science also being connected with the earth. It seems like there's a part of the science that is still fighting mother, fighting matter. And certainly I had that kind of idea about nature when I was little. Being a military kid, I thought science is better than the earth. you know, like man knows better than nature, or nature is not good enough. And, you know, it wasn't until later in college where I was like, wait a second, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that was certainly the information that I felt surrounded by. So it's the age-old thing of balancing science and faith in a way, or east and west, bringing the subtle energies or the feminine, because the feminine is subtle energy, into the awareness of the Western imagination that's more yang and big energy. So I think we're starting to see things pop up, but we all have to be kind of rebels in our own way to make clear boundaries. Like, are you just going to give your sovereignty away to somebody else and say, well, they know better? And yet I also want to respect the guilds, because I'm not a scientist. So I want to honor, you know, I want to remember how we honor the awards and merits that humans, each in our own way, become wise. And how do we regulate that so that it's not all just coming from a pharmaceutical company that's unregulated, that has all the money, and we're not allowed to question it without being called crazy. So
yeah, well, I really appreciate everyone's bravery in speaking authentically in this group, and the time commitment that it takes to, you know, converse all week in our chat, and then also show up for this meeting when you could be out there shopping for plastic things at the time. But what I'm encouraging everyone when I'm doing a session is, wherever you are, to start having these conversations, because I think that having, you know, thousands of chart readings at this point, there are phenomenal people out there who love the earth tremendously and want to do the Reiki. They want to start a spiritual, like, walking in the woods, reconnecting with the wild group and things like that. They have great ideas about womb space healing and putting their hand on their womb and asking the womb, what does she think? What does she want to say? I mean, there's incredible conversations that I'm having with people out there. And what we need to do really is to start being community again, like commit to one another and have a conversation. Even if you don't know what we're going to talk about, but just be like, we're going to talk, we're going to hold space, because when we do that, it goes out into that field of, we care, we love, we're ready to receive whatever new information that we can do good for Gaia. And in terms of the Bear Company, which was started by the German scientists that were held captive actually by the Nazis, because Claude's great-grandfather was one of them. Sure. And he just left. He heard you talking that his father was a brilliant Jewish man, but his grandfather was a brilliant German Jewish scientist. And a lot of the brilliant, like we've talked about, the brain drain of the scientists, they were taken into underground bases, and they were made to create pharmaceuticals that would alter us. So that every senior citizen, because I did elder care for 10 years, every senior citizen takes 2 Tylenol a day. And, you know, for a while it was aspirin, then it was changed to Tylenol. It's for arthritis, it's for this and that other thing, but it interacts with this huge other chemical cocktail that they're taking, that a lot of elders are taking. And I think it creates this also like lack of family coherence, because nobody can feel or enjoy anyone else, which I saw a lot. Like many elders have dementia. I mean, they start having dementia by the time they're about 65 with the amount of aluminum that we have. But also it's like that chemical cocktail. I take my Tylenol, take my Xanax, I take my, I don't know what they all are, because there was like, you know, a box of them this big and we got to take all of them. And then in the older years, they get the heroin, basically. I mean, it's a heavy level painkiller that when you're in a lot of pain, you also get that in your elder years. And I gave that. So I would always be going, I'm sorry, please forgive me. I love you. Thank you. I'm doing and I'm trying to take care of an elderly person with all of these prescriptions. And so what Grant's talking about, also like doing a really hard job, but not numbing yourself down because it's so painful that I'm doing this job with elderly people, is a real thing that we have in this society. Like, I'm glad Holly is in the know that Saturn and Pluto is causing people to feel bipolar, they're depressed, they're suicidal, this is the lowest point in my life, I have no reason to live. Yeah, I know. I've been hearing it. Yeah, I've been hearing it, okay? People feel hopeless, but that's Saturn and Pluto. That's the heaviest weight planets we have in an applying conjunction right now with the South Node, okay? All of that collective stuff that this group is willing to feel and talk about and process, that's how we do it. You know, when my shoulders are so tense and I just feel like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? The empathy of feeling that with Gaia is also how she can release it, and we release it for everybody. And I just want to, appreciate the time and commitment that this group has put into this conversation. So thank you all. And now I'll be quiet again, see what you want to talk about, because I did set this meeting until 5:30. So tell me what else you want to talk about.
Well, just to tie back in with last week's conversation and the out of bounds Mars, since Mars during this time has also gone out of bounds, which is Mars being either on the declination, which is more of like a vertical axis in relation to the sun, being either it's like 23 degrees above or below that kind of ecliptic line, or more in the in that we have kind of talked a little bit in our chat about how that is that when a planet goes out of bounds, it is kind of increases the wildness factor, kind of the revolutionary or rebelliousness. And again, it kind of ties into this Saturn conversation of boundaries. So, we're kind of breaking down boundaries in one area, and then Mars is now going in this out of bounds range and moving from Gemini into Cancer, where Mars is fed by the air of Gemini, but it goes into the watery Cancer, and then how is that going to feel for Mars? And so I've been doing more thinking about that, and also with other out of bound planets. And I looked up, like, personally, I have Venus out of bounds natally, and how that is manifested in my own chart, and how these places where we have these conversations about appropriateness, but then maybe like in some ways just natally here to be a bit of an outlier, and so it seems to me this kind of South Node heavy energy conversation is a little bit about where can we appropriately be outliers, where can we rebel, and this is a little bit of like Eris too, where can we be those disruptive energy to kind of break down loops and patterns, or really look at them and say we want to make a shift in a direction. I think with Mars, last year Mars went through a big retrograde in Aquarius. And then this is the first time it's going back around again, and it's almost going to come almost into Leo. But it's kind of almost getting to the place where it can, it's in Gemini now and out of bounds, and thinking about being in that Mars retrograde last summer and how did Mars change during its retrograde, and now it's going in this kind of other direction in another out of bounds way. And I know that it's like a push-pull thing where Mars has really been evolving in the last, I think, year. And I just kind of wanted to put that out for what people would think about. And I know Grant does a lot of work with men's spirituality, and kind of, we talk a lot about the journey of the goddess, but in some ways this is Mars's relationship to the Ceres, the nurturing of the earth, in this out of bounds and condition, and then also tying in with the heavy energy of that's going on in Capricorn. And I didn't know if anyone had any other, I know I just kind of like threw that out there, if anyone had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that the Magi were traditionally astrologers. Okay, so they were watching the stars. So if you think about the story, the Magi who came to greet Jesus, they were watching the stars. They were saying, you know, a great king must have been born because the stars were in a certain place. Now, when we're studying astrology, we're making that same celestial decision, like something big must be happening right now, okay? Because Mars is out of bounds, Saturn and Pluto are enclosing the south node. Several different areas where the masculine being in its own sign happened from January 1st. So Jupiter's in his own sign, that's the masculine. Saturn's in its own sign in Capricorn. Mars was in Aries, but now Mars is out of bounds. But there's something very interesting about the masculine within us versus the toxic feminine. And if you've read my post this week, the toxic part of the feminine in Cancer is that she's always giving. She's giving to the point of depleting herself. Now, in a way, Gaia is that giving, giving, giving. I'm going to just keep giving, keep giving selflessly, whatever you want, have it. So in a way, the feminine is Gaia. Like, she's been giving all her oil. She's been giving all her fracking of the natural gas. Her prairies, I've driven all through Colorado. Her prairies are all fracked. All over Colorado, it's fracking devices going like this, deep into Gaia. Gaia's like Cancer in the North Node, in the shadow of, I'm just going to be a doormat and you can all walk all over me and have anything you want. Now, with Saturn stationing, we have to bring up our divine masculine of our boundaries and our backbone and our skeletal system, and say to Gaia, no, we're not going to require toxic feminine anymore. We love you, Gaia. We worship you. You're sacred to us. And the same with Jupiter and Sagittarius. Jupiter's going, this has got to be, we've got to have justice here. You know, the big, expansive Jupiterian lightning bolt. I don't know if anybody knows this, but my friends from Greece said that the same day that Notre Dame was burning, a lightning bolt hit the Acropolis and killed 5 people.
Holy cow.
Do you know that?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, so I mean, and you know, we talked about it in group. I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, does everyone feel that? Something electrical's happening, like dark thunder. And my friend who posts in a different language had posted that, and I said, can you please translate what happened in Greece? And he said, well, a huge lightning bolt hit the Acropolis today, and 5 people died, but it was like Zeus's thunderbolt. There will be justice, and Saturn and Pluto are going, we're going to destroy structures, get your backbone ready, and now Mars is doing whatever Mars wants to do, because we all know from last week it went over Cursa and Rigel. And when you get me talking astrology, I'm going to go fast. So if I'm going way too fast, I'm sorry for everybody. But I know that on May 10th, Venus is going to conjunct Eris.
Well, for fun.
Mm-hmm. So Eris is also going to have her little rebellion with the goddess Venus. There's some very interesting things that the Magi are bringing up right now. And when we make them conscious, that's when the celestials can bring that down onto Gaia. That's our job. That's my job, I know, is to have that conversation, make those celestial possibilities fully conscious and ground it down into Gaia in the best way possible. So I'll be quiet on the astrology for a bit and see what else people want to say in the 9 minutes that we have. We have not talked about the reproductive system of woman being harvested by beings who are using woman's reproductive system. And I don't know if we want to open that can of worms, but.
I was just thinking that as you mentioned that, so.
9 minutes.
Yeah.
Open that can of worms, hon.
I listening to the talk from last week, it was very stimulating, because there's a part of me where I feel like Laura and I have had opposite experiences, like both experiencing different sets of opposites, and where I've just recently, as I've gotten older, gone into a kind of a healing phase around accepting my menstruation and trying to do all these different practices to take care of myself, because, and I've known this ever since, ask my mom, it is the end of the world once a month for me. It is. And it's like, okay, do I change my diet? Do I do this? What is it? Do I just sit in a yurt for 3 days sealed off by myself, and you bring me food and don't talk to me? Don't let me make any major decisions. I don't know what it is, but it is a tremendous amount of energy that at 40, almost 43 years old, I am still learning how to work with it. And when that idea was brought in that we were manipulated, I thought, can you imagine how much more productive we would be without that monthly go back to the underworld, go back, go back, or be this baby making machine. And then I met someone recently who came to me, and as a sensitive person, I can kind of read energy a little bit, and she had a lot of gray energy about her. Skin color, really large head, very small person, and this like connection to the Mormons, where they were like have lots of kids, and I felt like I got this flash of like, oh my gosh, and I think this came up with Corey Good and David Wilcock too, but this idea of the darkness trying to breed out humanity. And so these different programs being set up in spiritual religions to just have lots of babies without the sacredness that you all were talking about last week, or that we know like somehow our souls are much, to be tended or called forth, or that there's singing and prayer, and that being a pregnant mother, why are we making these women work all the time when we're not honoring that whole life process. It's become very mechanized. And I just had this sense that, oh my gosh, this is a breeding program that was disguised as a spiritual program to bring in lower density beings or programmable life forms. And that we do have a sovereign choice, that all beings are on a journey of progressing in their soul's journey. But it was like it was right in front of me in the past couple weeks, where I was feeling into that.
Something else that came up for me this week was talking with a friend who her own experience was getting tremendous ovarian cysts, and it was almost like her body was like holding onto her eggs, and so they would not actually release, and then they would create these big, extremely painful cysts. And like thinking about what the energy is around that, like what was the disruption of that seemingly easy process of, one egg, it just releases, but then there's something going on there to hold that back. And in that holding back, it created like a big, almost grapefruit size, painful experience for her. And so she ended up losing her ovary, and then the rest of her, ultimately all her reproductive organs, and it almost seems like how that there is some kind of disruption at sometimes for, there's an experience of disruption of that creative process through the body.
And is it that we've lost sight of honoring the goddess in our culture, so that we're experiencing, a shadow of that being missing? The goddess energies were able to reproduce herself, or use our creativity for co-creative consciousness, or even honoring that yin way of the feminine, where we're really receptive. And so if we can really receive, then we can really release. I mean, I think a lot of the way our society structures itself is very masculine, and we don't necessarily honor that feminine way of being. And so our feminine parts are suffering.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were commenting that they knew that we did not need to menstruate or ovulate, because just like telepathy, levitation, teleportation, and all of those forms that we actually have of our own free energy, we can create life from ourselves. And my understanding is that originally man and woman would make love just to recreate their auric field. So I learned this from Barry Long many years ago, before the internet even existed. He wrote a book called Making Love, and also a book called The Origins of the Universe. And he said that when we were more etheric, man and woman would come together to make love, to strengthen their light body, to strengthen their inner technologies. It was never about recreating more offspring. So that's very interesting. And Jessica is touching upon what we talked about last week, of that we have really been manipulated, and we're part of this reproduction program because millions of humans are harvested from this planet for off-planet work. That is something that Gaia herself, being the gracious mothering being that she is, will support whatever we want, but we have to take back our sovereignty and say, no, we're not going to overconsume. We're not going to overpopulate. We're not going to feed the war machine. And when we make love with man, it's because we want to fully engage the light body, opening the stargates and the technologies that we have within us. If we have cysts in our womb, it's pretty uncomfortable to be making love with a man. So we want to do everything that we can to make the womb space sacred, make Gaia sacred, make all of this a sacred soul experience that we're having here. And this conversation is important. And I encourage people to really make communities out there, talk together, get the conversation going, because we are Gaia's feedback loop. Gaia is at a choice point. What do you want, folks? So maybe the meeting's going to end and maybe we'll go on for the next 2 hours, but that's how long I scheduled the meeting. But it hasn't stopped recording. So does anyone else feel like there's really anything really pressing that you still want to say? All right, well, I'm going to close for now. And I thank you all for your commitment to having this conversation. So bye-bye for now. Love you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.